Before we begin, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for being part of the story. It happened around 10 years ago, when I was working as a field inspector for a bank. I was part of the asset management division, which meant I had to inspect properties that had been repossessed from previous owners who couldn't pay off their loans. My job was to regularly check on these properties to make sure they were still in good condition. On one particular assignment, I experienced something that has stayed with me ever since, a chilling encounter I'll never forget. It happened during one of my routine inspections. The property I was assigned to visit that day included a warehouse, an office, and a worker's house where former employees used to live. According to the documents, the site was being watched over by an elderly security guard. I called the day before to make sure he would be available for the inspection and let him know when I'd be arriving. I arrived early in the morning, but the weather wasn't great. The sky was overcast and it looked like rain was on the way. As I got out of my car, I saw the entire property was surrounded by a tall, secure fence. I approached the gate and looked through the fence to see if the guard was around, but I didn't see him. Instead, I noticed a young boy and girl playing happily inside the property. I looked left and right, trying to spot the guard again, but there was no sign of him. So I called out to the children and asked them to come over. When they did, I asked, "Have you seen the security guard? I'm from the bank. Is he around?" The girl responded,
"Oh yes, he's inside."
So I asked the children to go get him. The two kids ran off into the building. Soon enough, an elderly man, the security guard, came out to meet me. He looked like he was in his late 50s. I introduced myself as a bank officer and explained that I was there to check on the property. The guard asked whether I planned to inspect the whole site or just the outside, like the previous inspector had.
"Are you going to check the entire area today, or just around the outside like the last guy?"
I explained that field inspectors typically take turns visiting and inspecting properties, and I wasn't the only one assigned to this site. Then I told him that I planned to inspect the entire premises that day. As I glanced down at the documents in my hand, I mentioned that I would start with the workers' housing. Upon hearing this, the guard's expression changed. He looked slightly uneasy. He asked,
"Are you sure you want to go in there? The last person who came refused to go in."
Still, I insisted. I told him that this time it was necessary because there was a potential buyer interested in the property. "I have to take a full look," I told him. So the two of us walked toward the workers' housing. As we got closer, the atmosphere suddenly felt strange. Something about it was unnerving. When we reached a certain spot, the guard stopped and told me he didn't want to go inside. He said he'd wait right there and that I could go in alone.
"You go ahead, take any pictures you need, and if you need anything, just call me,"
he said. Just as I was about to step inside, the guard warned me again.
"Be careful in there. There are lots of snakes. And maybe you should ask for permission before going in."
There was no one inside to ask permission from, but I knew exactly what he meant. In many Asian cultures, people believe that entering an empty or abandoned place without asking permission, especially one with history, might disturb lingering spirits and bring bad luck or illness. A quick, respectful phrase is often said as a protective gesture. However, I didn't give it much thought and found it unnecessary. I simply continued into the housing. The workers' housing was a row of single-story, apartment-style rooms built right next to each other, much like factory or construction dormitories. Now, though, the entire area was overgrown with weeds, and parts of the structure were starting to rot. It was obvious that no one had lived there in a long time, but what immediately caught my attention was the uneven ground. The terrain wasn't flat. It was strangely bumpy, covered with scattered mounds, as if dirt had been piled up in random places across the area. I began taking photos from various angles around the area until I was done. Then I rejoined the security guard, who had been waiting at a distance, and together, we continued walking toward the office building. As we got closer, I noticed the building was in far worse shape than the workers' housing. The structure looked dangerously unstable, like it could collapse at any moment. Peering inside, I found nothing but empty rooms. Most of the ceiling tiles had fallen and were now scattered across the floor. Nearby, though, one room looked like it had been kept in better condition. That's where the guard stayed. I told him I wanted to walk around and take more photos of the surrounding area, and that he didn't need to come with me. He could wait in his room. He agreed, so I went off on my own. I continued exploring the compound, photographing each building one by one. The property was quite large, and eventually I came across a structure that looked like it might once have been someone's home. I tried to go inside, but the door was locked from the inside. I reached my hand through the metal bars, trying to unlock it. Just then, a sudden cold breeze swept across my hand. Instantly, goosebumps rose all over my body. Right away, I knew something inside didn't want me there. I quickly pulled my hand back and decided to take only exterior shots of the building. Then I continued on, documenting the rest of the area. Once finished, I returned to the security guard, who was waiting near the office building. As I approached, I told him I had finished photographing everything except for the office and asked if he could show me inside. The guard led the way, and as we walked together, we started talking. He told me he watches over the entire property alone. No one else stays with him. Anyone who had tried to spend the night never lasted long.
They never make it through the night. The noise of kids running around and playing keeps them up.
That caught my attention. Children? It must be those two little kids I saw earlier. They were probably just being playful, running around like any other children. No wonder people had trouble sleeping. So I asked, "Is it just you and those two kids living here?" But the guard didn't say anything. He just kept walking, leading me around the property so I could finish taking my photos. Once I was done, I thanked the guard and got ready to leave. He walked me to the front gate. Just before I stepped out, he stopped me.
Do you remember earlier when I told you to ask permission before entering the workers' housing?
I nodded. His expression grew serious. He explained that back when the warehouse was still operational, most of the workers had been undocumented migrants from neighboring countries.
It wasn't uncommon for some to get sick and pass away,
he said. He paused, then said quietly, "Because of their status, it was hard to handle the bodies properly, so we buried them near the workers' housing." As I listened, chills ran down my spine. Suddenly it hit me. The mounds I'd seen earlier weren't just random piles of dirt. They were graves. Bodies were buried under there. And when the guard told me to ask permission, it wasn't just a figure of speech. He literally meant asking the spirits for permission to enter, and I had totally dismissed it. He confirmed my thoughts.
We didn't know what else to do, so we buried them there.
I stood frozen in shock at what I had just heard. After gathering myself, I asked, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The guard replied,
If I had told you from the beginning, you probably wouldn't have been able to get your work done. You would have left right away, so I decided to tell you now, right before you leave.
Still trying to process everything, I stood there quietly for a while. Then, just as I was about to close the gate behind me, a question popped into my head. I turned and asked, "What about the two kids that were running around earlier? Where did they go?" The guard looked at me confused.
What kids?
He asked.
There are no kids here. This is a restricted area. The buildings are all falling apart. We don't let outsiders in.
I stared at him, stunned. I quickly explained what I'd seen that morning. The guard listened, then calmly said,
Oh, those two kids. They're the reason no one can sleep here. They're not real kids. They're ghost children.
He continued.
They belong to the former owner. They used to live in that house you saw earlier, and one day both died in a tragic accident. After the warehouse shut down, the owner moved out, but their souls still remained here, playing around. It's normal.
A new question formed in my mind. Then how did you know I was waiting at the gate? Didn't you come because the children told you I was here waiting? The guard shook his head.
No, I was informed the field inspector would be here at 9 a.m., so I came to open the gate.
My legs nearly gave out. Only now did I fully realize what had happened. I had encountered those two children the moment I first arrived, and it happened in broad daylight.